All right, everyone, get ready because today we're going deep on something pretty amazing, manual transmissions and those huge trucks we see on the highway. Ever wonder what it takes to shift gears in something that weighs more than, like, a dinosaur?
It's a lot more than just moving a stick around and hoping for the best. It's really a dance between the driver and the truck where knowing how it all works can mean a smooth ride or, let's just say, not so smooth.
Yeah, I bet.
Right.
We're using the Commercial Driver License Manual for this deep dive, specifically Section 2.3 about shifting gears. And this manual makes it clear that shifting gears right is super important. It's almost like, becoming one with the truck.
There's definitely something to that. When you shift gears right, you're not just changing how fast you're going, you're making sure the engine's power goes to the wheels at the perfect time. It's about staying in control, keeping the truck in good shape, and most importantly, it's about safety.
For sure. And the manual talks about something called double clutching, which honestly sounds a little scary. What is double clutching and why is it so important for these massive trucks?
Double clutching makes sure the power flows smoothly from the engine to the transmission, which is super important when you have tons of cargo. Imagine those huge gears inside the transmission, all spinning at different speeds. If you try to force them together without matching those speeds, it's not going to be good.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. So how does a driver actually do this double clutch thing?
It's like matching the engine speed to how the gears are moving. So you take your foot off the gas and press the clutch while going into neutral. Then, here's the important part. You let go of the clutch for a second, which lets the engine's speed match the gears. Then you press the clutch again and smoothly shift to the next gear.
It's like a little dance with your foot on the clutch. The manual says that timing is key here, and that new drivers often have trouble with staying in neutral too long. Any tips on that?
Definitely. It's all about finding the right feel. Stay in neutral too long and it gets harder to get into the next gear. If you feel resistance, just go back to neutral, match the engine speed to how fast you're going, and try again. Don't force it. You'll just get frustrated and could even hurt the transmission.
So it's a balance between not being too quick, but not too slow either. Speaking of timing, what about knowing when to change gears? The manual talks about using engine speed, those RPMs, and also road speed in MPH.
Right. The tachometer is your friend if you're using engine speed. It tells you when the engine's getting to the top of its ideal RPM range for that gear, meaning it's time to upshift. It's like the engine saying, hey, I'm ready for the next gear now. Or if you're using road speed, you got to learn the speeds that each gear is for using the speedometer as your guide.
So figuring out what works best for you is key. I also read about something called progressive shifting in newer trucks. What is that?
Oh, it's a really cool development. Basically, with progressive shifting, the best RPM for shifting actually goes up as you go up through the gears, which saves fuel and makes the power smoother.
Wow, that is neat. So we've covered going up through the gears, but what about downshifting? The manual says it's really important, especially coming down hills or going into curves.
Downshifting is all about being in control and using the engine's power to slow down. Imagine you're going down a steep hill with a full load. Gravity wants to pull you faster, and if you're only using your brakes, they could overheat and stop working as well. That's called brake fade, and it can be really dangerous.
Now that sounds terrifying. How does downshifting help in that situation?
Well, if you downshift before you start going down the hill, you can use the engine to help slow you down instead of just the brakes. It's about working smarter, not harder.
Okay, that makes sense. So you're using the engine itself to help slow you down and giving the brakes a little break? Smart. The manual also mentions downshifting before curves. Why is that important?
It's all about keeping control and staying stable, which is even more important when you're dealing with the weight of a big truck. Think about it. You don't want to go into a curve too fast and risk jackknifing. If you downshift before, you can keep your speed steady and be in the right gear to speed up smoothly out of the turn.
So you're all set for what's next, like some kind of driving chess game.
Yeah.
And actually downshifting is basically just doing the opposite of upshifting, right?
Exactly. Just like with upshifting, you use the clutch and the gas pedal to match the engine speed to the lower gear you want. And just like upshifting, knowing when to downshift is super important, and you can use the engine speed or the road speed to figure that out.
Right. It always goes back to those gauges. The manual talks about some of the more complex setups you can have in these big trucks, things like multi-speed rear axles and auxiliary transmissions. I can barely handle a stick shift in a car. Those terms just sound intimidating.
They're really not as scary as they sound. It's basically like having a wider range of gears to choose from, like having special tools for different driving situations.
Okay, I like that more tools for the road. So what's the advantage of having all those extra gears?
It gives you more control over how much power the truck has and how fast it's going. A multi-speed rear axle, for example, gives you multiple gear ratios right there in the axle, while an auxiliary transmission is like a second gearbox. These are really helpful when you're on tough terrain like steep hills or if you're pulling super heavy loads.
So you always have the right gear for whatever's happening, which makes you more efficient and in control. The manual also mentions automatic transmissions in heavy vehicles. I'd imagine there are still some things specific to those bigger vehicles, even with an automatic.
For sure, even if you have an automatic transmission, you still need to know how it works, especially in a big truck. One important thing is to use the lower gears for engine braking when you're going downhill, just like you do with a manual.
Makes sense. You need that extra power from the engine to help slow you down no matter how the gears are changing.
Exactly. That shows how understanding how all this works, whether you're driving a manual or an automatic, is so important to drive these big trucks safely and efficiently.
Yeah, even though the technology is always changing, the basics are still what matters.
I agree. You always got to respect the forces at play and know that what you do as a driver really affects how the vehicle moves.
It really makes you realize how much skill it takes to be a truck driver.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget that when you just see them driving down the road.
Yeah, they make it look so easy. But it's just like any other job. There's a lot that goes into it, a lot of knowledge and experience, and this manual does a great job of explaining it all.
It really does.
Yeah.
We talked about a lot today, from that double clutching thing to how important downshifting is, even all those more complex setups with the different gear ranges. I used to think driving a truck was just about keeping it between the lines, but this has been a real eye-opener.
Totally. It's pretty cool to learn about the mechanics of driving a manual transmission in a big truck.
Definitely. So for anyone listening who's maybe thought about what it would be like to drive one of those big rigs, what's the one thing you'd want them to remember?
Don't forget how much skill and responsibility it takes to drive these trucks. They're important. Next time you see a truck driver out there on the road, remember that they're not just drivers, they're skilled professionals who know exactly how to handle these powerful machines. And hey, maybe after listening to this, you'll want to learn even more. You never know.
That's a great point. There's so much more to it than you might think. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive into the world of manual transmissions in big trucks. We hope you learned something new today and maybe even gained a new appreciation for the skill it takes to drive these amazing machines. Until next time, drive safe.